In early January every year in Galveston, Texas, we hold the Keep On Tookin conference. You remember the slogan, Keep On Truckin, from the Robert Crumb cartoon? And you remember, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Well, once we've taken the 12 steps, our job is to keep on tookin. We have main speakers, panels with attendee participation, and, this year, Father Tom from Oakland, California, who is AA and Al-Anon. There is also a Q&A session as the last session of the weekend. As the recordings are available, I will upload them here as a guest spot on the podcast.
We'll start with the Serenity Prayer. All together. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I hope you all had a lovely dinner. If you didn't hear earlier, Lucy announced all the silent auction winners. So if you haven't picked that up from her yet, you can at the end of the session. Thank you so much for participating in that. It's completely a fundraiser to defray the costs of the conference, and we appreciate you very much. So I've asked Bill to come and read the preamble to the meeting tonight, which is actually the AA preamble.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Bill, and I am an alcoholic. God gave me the gift of sobriety February 6, 1984. AA Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Okay, please help me welcome Father Tom.
Goodness gracious. I'm Tom. I'm an alcoholic in great need of Al-Anon. I brought with me some bumper stickers that say, "Oh, lighten up." And that's for those of you who are a little too serious about everything. Some of us practice a program of total heaviosity, you know. So, oh, lighten up. If you take it and give it to someone else, it's an Al-Anon slip, in case. So you know what that's like. And I have my schedule up here too if you want to see what I do for a living. It's up there. The spiritual awakening stuff. I like the language of the program. We're careful about religious language. We call ourselves a spiritual program, not a religious program. We don't talk about getting fixed or saved here. There will be some discussion about recovered or recovering, and there can be some fistfights in the parking lot over that one. So my solution, I learned this in studying scripture at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. When you look at some passages of scripture and you say, does it mean this or that or this or that or this? And the answer is yes. So are we recovered or recovering? Yes. We're so glad you're recovered, but don't stop recovering, because then we read about you in the papers. So they're both true. And we talk about the spiritual awakening. And I like waking up. I do it a lot, which means I keep falling asleep also. The stories told of the Buddha living in India, a very privileged family, protected from the difficulties of life. And one day he gets away from his family, his parents and his own children and his wife, gets away and gets outside into the real world, and he is shocked by everything that's wrong. It's very similar to those of us who have problems with the higher power when we try to figure out the problem of evil. Why is there evil in the world, and if there can be God? And the book of Job in the Hebrew Bible. I mean, these are not questions that we just came up with. These are great big questions. Rabbi Harold Kushner's remarkable book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's well worth reading if you have a few questions. You want to talk to smart Jews. They know a lot. And I've had some very important rabbis teaching me, and I'm grateful for the depth that they bring to my own shallow little life. Anyway, poverty, stupidity, cruelty, disease, how does this make sense? And the young man will try to make sense out of it to the best of his ability. And the Hindu experience is multifaceted. There are so many ways that the Hindu faith expresses itself in lots of, and he tries everything and nothing satisfies him. And one day, having tried lots of things, he's sitting under a tree and he reaches enlightenment. It falls into place. Everything is suffering. What is the cause of suffering? Attachment is the cause of suffering. Desire is the cause of suffering. Demanding my way is the cause of suffering. How do you get out of suffering? Detach. So suddenly he became a much calmer and relaxed person. And people noticed that, and they said, Are you one of the gods? No, he said, I'm not a god. Are you a guru or a prophet? No, I'm none of that. What are you? And he said, I'm awake. And I think in more contemporary American terms, we would say, I can spot bullshit. And it has changed everything because I don't chase it anymore. And your life gets much more simple. To be awake. We come to believe. And I'm someone who prefers sedation. I love being stoned. And I smoked non-habit-forming marijuana for years and years and years. Listened to Neil Diamond and Isaac Hayes. You know, this is my gurus. We legalized marijuana in California a few years ago for recreational use. And one of my sponsees called me and said, marijuana's legal now. And I said, beer's been legal since 1933. Legality is not the issue. It's clean and sober. To wake up. And the poet Rumi, 1200s, says, I always wake up empty and afraid. And some of us wake up with a jolt. little waking up, moments when you realize you're 20 years sober and you still know nothing. It's as profound when you're 49 years sober and you realize how little you know. Simon and Garfunkel, the poets of my generation, had one of the songs, and they talked about years ago, and they say, "Oh, I was much older then. I'm younger than that now." A book that made the rounds a lot when Bill is waking up and learning a lot of things. Bill had a way of asking questions. He learned from people. He learned a lot about alcoholism from Dr. Silkworth before he met Dr. Bob. And there were other people, and he read stuff, and he talked to people, and he would have conversations with a lot of different folks. Bill was a curious, searching kind of guy. And he will read William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is still being published. It was a series of lectures he gave in Scotland in 1905. James was a Harvard professor, 1900, 1890, a major force of the American high society smart people. And he was a medical man, but he never really practiced medicine. He got involved with this new thing called psychology, and they're trying to invent it along with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who Bill will have some correspondence with. I mean, they're looking at something brand new about being people, not just, oh, I have fingers and toes. No, there's a whole inside of memory and emotions and stuff and things. What's in there? How do we access that? And Freud thought that memories were like photography. Something happened, you photographed it and then shoved it down, and then you photographed something else and shoved it down. And in therapy, we're going to resurrect those photographs, and the way you remember it is exactly the way it happened. Now, we know that's not true. I mean, memory is very creative. I was trying to put together I'm the youngest, and I remember a Christmas Eve where my father got very drunk and my mother was very angry, and I remember a few other things, and I asked my middle brother, who's 5 years older than me, do you remember this happening? And I mentioned 2 or 3 or 4 things, and he said, oh yeah, all that happened, but over 6 months. I remember it as one evening, but it was over a period of time, and memory can be very creative. I have vivid memories of some things that never happened. There was late 1950s, we had the Christian anti-communist crusade. Dr. Fred Schwartz, who I think was an Australian, and he came to the Cow Palace in San Francisco to warn us all about communism. And we watched it on TV. He was a big thing, and Dr. Schwartz. And the way I remember it, that's objectively what happened. I remember him coming to my local parish and talking to us in church. Now, that never happened. He was on the TV. So, memory. So, anyway, William James, he interviewed a lot of people who claimed to have religious or spiritual experiences. And he said, what were you like? What happened? And what are you like now? And he puts together this whole series of lectures. There's a whole section on what holiness looks like. He quotes the Buddha, he quotes the Jesuits, he quotes the King James Bible, he looks at the Methodists, he looks at this group, and he comes together with a lot of different ideas. And it's from him, the title gives it away. There's a variety of these experiences. There's not just one. There's a variety. And some of them are really quick and fast and dramatic. And some of them are really slow and gradual. And lots of us have all kinds. My sponsor believed that getting sober was a spiritual experience. That's a spiritual experience. And then he would talk with people who demanded another spiritual experience. Now I'm sober, but I want more. And he said, one's not enough. No, I want more. Little alcohol problem. James, their father was a tyrant and a drunk. And there were a couple of kids. Henry James, his brother, dealt with Dad by moving to the United Kingdom and writing creepy short stories. No, nothing personal there, Tim. I don't mean to offend you. They had a sister named Alice who never flourished. She was, in the Victorian era, she was a girl living in a house full of cigar-smoking men. So it's difficult. And she was an invalid, and she never was allowed to bloom or fly, and lots of restrictions on women back then, worse than now. And she developed a relationship, a partnership with another lady, and they spent many years together. And at that time, that was referred to as a Boston marriage. And then they had a brother who drank himself to death. An American family. Teddy Roosevelt was president. He had a brother who drank himself to death. The next president was William Howard Taft, who had a brother who drank himself to death. Teddy Roosevelt's brother who drank himself to death was Eleanor Roosevelt's father. So, and Eleanor was not a pretty girl, and Mama only liked pretty girls, so she didn't want to raise a homely little girl, so she put Eleanor in a house full of alcoholic relatives. An adult child of an alcoholic, which helped prepare her to be the First Lady of the United States for many, many years with Franklin Roosevelt, who was not an easy person either. But I have no opinion. William James. And he'll write this on the chapter on saintliness. Now this is a bit to do with the third step, the transformation. It's kind of getting restored to sanity and also turning things over. And we have a new employer. I'm not in charge of the outcome. I get to do all the footwork. And this is what James writes. The transition from tenseness, self-responsibility, and worry to equanimity, receptivity, and peace is the most wonderful of all those shiftings of inner equilibrium, those changes of the personal center of energy, which I have analyzed so often. How does a person change? Tense, self-responsibility, worry, equanimity, receptivity, peace, which I have analyzed so often, semicolon. And the chief wonder of it is that it so often comes about not by doing, but by simply relaxing and throwing the burden down. You've stopped trying to figure it all out. You're just going to follow directions. When quarantine opened up, I went to an early morning meeting close to me, full of elderly persons such as myself, and we talked a bit about stuff. And one of the guys, it was really good dealing with people right off the street, and he was telling the story of the guy that came in. He was sober a couple of days, but very jumpy and very beaten up. He'd been out there a long time. And he looked at 12 steps and 12 traditions and 12 concepts and slogans. And he said, all those words, I can't possibly do this. Barely literate perhaps, but overwhelmed by all the words. And my friend said to him, He used vulgar language, which I will not use because I'm so elevated. But are you messed up? Are you just messed up? Oh, yeah. That's step one. You think we can help? Yeah, that's step two. You willing to follow directions? Okay, that's step three. Get a pen, we're going to start your fourth step. And before coffee was served, this fellow was doing his fourth step. There's a friend of mine in North Carolina named Ellie, and she would say that she tells newcomers the first three steps are make your bed and get a job. And there's some truth to that too. Throw the burden down. There are lots of ways of doing fourth steps. The purpose is for us to get some idea of where we've been and what we've been doing. It's greatly resisted by a lot of us. I'm not a writer. I have friends who are writers. I'm not a big writer. I can write, but I'm not a writer. And I wrote whenever I was very unhappy or very angry or very upset. And as soon as that passed, I stopped writing. So I started writing when I was about 6 months clean and sober. I was at a meeting. I hated the person chairing the meeting. I don't remember his name now, but he was awful and I hated him, and he was stupid and he was awful. And I left the meeting and went back to my house and wrote down my list of resentments, and his name was the top of the list. He just bothered me to no end. But it started the process. And then I made the list of names of persons and places and things that bothered me. I didn't go across the page, what happened and what's my part and so on. No, a list of names. You can figure the rest of it out. And then I got a list of names, and I had resentment stuff. And then I had fear stuff to write about. And that's more difficult for me because the way I'm wired, I was not aware of being fearful. I was barely aware of being angry. I'm a sedated person. But with me, if something scares me, I get angry very quickly, and I'll notice the anger. That still happens. Sometimes I'll notice I'm just very bothered, but something scared me. New technology scared me. I was going through an airport this past year in Southeast Asia, and I'd been to this country many times before. We were doing a workshop over there. And they suddenly says, "Where's your electronic gizmo?" And I don't have an electronic gizmo. Last time we didn't need an electronic gizmo, but that changed, and they didn't tell me. And I was suddenly faced with a new thing, and it was electronic. And I was frightened, and I got mad. It worked out because I took a breath, and I asked God for help, and I went to the place and filled out the form. You fill out the form, and then you can go through. But don't catch me by surprise. It scares me, and I get angry. Still, to this day. I tell people, of course, I'm angry. I'm surrounded by fools. And the fear stuff. I have less energy to keep the lid on. I'm more aware of vulnerability and fear than I was 10 years ago. It's probably always been there, but I'm noticing it more. Sexual stuff. Churches get wild about that. My church surely has. In the code of moral law, the canon law stuff, the rights and wrongs and 10 commandments and things, they just had zillions of questions about anything sexual. They were quite obsessed with it. And not very happily so. Everything's wrong. Everything's wrong. Okay, that's helpful. In the book, Bill, with great sanity, says about sexual stuff, "Where have I been selfish?" Well, welcome. Yeah, a lot of us recognize selfishness. Where have I been selfish? Where have I been thoughtless? Where have I been an idiot? So have we all. And money makes people crazy. I used to think, hearing people share secrets, confession, fifth steps, lots of times the thing that people are most ashamed or embarrassed about is sexual stuff. But money is right up there too. Owing money, borrowing money, not being good with money, having debts. People are so ashamed. And sharing that with another person. Lots of us do it with our sponsors, but you don't have to. It says God, ourselves, and another human being, and some sponsors don't really qualify. I did mine with my sponsor. I was almost 2 years sober, and I had a list of stuff, and I wanted, although I felt shame and embarrassment and self-loathing, I shared it with him because I wanted to be vulnerable to him. And I mentioned in that afternoon some things I had never talked with him about before. And it took about an hour. I'm boring and repetitive. And then I was done. And the step does not say we admitted and then discussed. It just says we admitted. So I was done and I had nothing else to say. And he was quiet for a moment because he's an introvert. They're quiet a lot. You don't always even know they're breathing, you know. And then he said, well, one thing's really clear. And I went, oh no, something's clear. I'm going to get judgment. Analysis. Suggestions. Oh, God, please no. He said, one thing's really clear, both you and I need this program very much. And then he left, and I was thrilled to see him go. And I didn't call him the next day. Oh, let's get together. I still had all the, can I trust this guy? What if I call him and he says, I don't really sponsor people like you because I have such high standards. What about anxiety, fearing? So I just stayed away from him for about 6 months, and then I went to meetings. But in Los Angeles, there are 1,000 meetings a week. You can avoid your sponsor pretty easily. And it was right around Passover, and Rabbi Magnin, who Wilshire Boulevard Temple, right in the middle of L.A., just a mile north of my school, he would throw an open house for clergy in the neighborhood. And we would all gather and rub shoulders and say hello and be civil to each other rather than yelling at each other, which I think is progress. And I went, and my sponsor was there. And I saw him across the room, and he waved with a nice smile. And I went up and I said, hi, and he said, oh, I'm so glad to see you. He didn't say, where have you been? What's wrong with you? He just said, hooray, I'm so glad to see you. And then he said, I want to tell you something about your fifth step. And I went, oh no, this room full of people. Oh no, it's going to be this terrible thing. And he said, you can do steps 1, 2, and 3 all by yourself and God in the room alone. Same with step 4. In step 5, you have to include another person. And he said, and as the other person you included in your fifth step, I just want to tell you, if you keep working a program with some consistency and honesty and goodwill, you're going to have a good life. That's what he wanted to tell me. Keep showing up and do the footwork. Oh my. So I was 2.5 years sober, and I noticed that I had someone I could trust. He wasn't going to run from me, and he wasn't going to make 100 suggestions to change me. So 20 years sober, I took a week off, and I went to a Benedictine monastery in New Mexico called Christ in the Desert. Vegetarian place. Georgia O'Keeffe lived in that area. She painted lots of paintings and lots of landscapes, and you could see Georgia O'Keeffe paintings and say what an imagination she has, but it's not an imagination, that is the landscape. It's northern New Mexico is unlike, it's not Texas and it's not Arizona. It's different. So I was there for a week, quiet, and I read the book. I read stories in the book as a way of getting back to basics. Earlier today I read that about the guy from Chicago who tracked down Dr. Bob, and he and Dr. Bob went through the 6-step program. And then he writes, Dr. Bob led me through all of these steps. At the moral inventory, he brought up several of my bad personality traits or character defects, such as selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, and resentments. Selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, and resentments. And they jumped off the page because those are mine. I mean, they really are mine. Resentments, fears, sexual stuff, and money. Oh yeah, but these are mine. And I think it works like this. If I notice something in you, there's a good chance I have some of it too. That's not always true, but frequently. If I notice something in you and it bothers me, it definitely is going on inside of me. I led a retreat years ago in Los Angeles, and on Saturday afternoon after another talk, one of the women came up to me with her jaw clenched. And she said, "You are so arrogant." I'm a white male, I'm a college graduate, I'm a Catholic priest, I'm a Jesuit. Of course I'm arrogant. There's a few other things we could list there, but absolute, I'm entitled. I mean, good heavens, look at me. And all my friends know I'm arrogant. This is not a secret. I mean, if we've had a cup of coffee, you pick up the arrogance right away, right? And but I think she had to leave. She couldn't stay because my analysis years later is I was her mirror. She saw herself in me and couldn't stand it. I've had that relation. I just can't stand the person because it's me. I had a friend, we would travel together sometimes. I couldn't travel with him because he's me, but worse. And I'd be so offended by his stupidity and selfishness, but it's me. So I got back home and I called my sponsor and I said, lots of times we just talked about stuff, but occasionally there's a real problem or an issue or a question, and you need to have that conversation too. But I said, listen, I've asked to have my defects of character removed. Why do I still have them? I mean, the selfishness. I think about me a lot. When I was getting off the plane in Houston, there were a lot. Americans do not know how to get off and on planes. We loiter and we dawdle and we wonder and we stop. And if you go to Japan, they know how to get off and on planes. They are pronto, quick, fast. And when people are dawdling and dragging and having a conversation and but I didn't do that because I have a perfect Al-Anon program. But I sure thought all those things. What's wrong with you people? Selfishness. They're interfering in my time, Conceit. Don't you know who I am? Jealousy. Oh, they're stronger, they're smarter, they're more of this, they're more of that. The comparison stuff that happens, the jealousy. Carelessness. I wish I weren't careless, but I really am. I lose things. I lose people. All of a sudden, I notice I haven't talked to my friend in 3 years. How did that happen? Well, we got busy. This past year, I went out of my way. I flew to different places to see friends I hadn't seen in a long time. I found out one had been sober 7 years. I didn't know that. Carelessness, intolerance. Under there, I'm going to throw my prejudices and my bigotries and my suspicions, my intolerance. And I grew up very frightened of anybody that looked different. And therefore angry. And I had a big mouth. And 16, 17, 18-year-old arrogance and bigotry is not a pretty sight to see. And I was told by the members of my community, your attitudes are really wrong and change them or get out. So I had to spend some years reaching out and sitting next to people who were different from me so I could find out they were just like me. And I'm very grateful for that. But if I'm not careful, it sneaks back in. The prejudice. Ill temper. I don't think I'm cranky, but other people think I'm cranky. I just can't imagine why. Sarcasm. Well, I don't have a problem with that. Let me talk for just a minute about humor, though. A lot of American humor is attack humor. We make fun of people. We ridicule people. When I was teaching, even sober, it's a weapon I use to control kids. And I remember, I'm sober now a couple years, and it was class evaluation time. And I said some really mean things to kids just to shut them up. And one of the bright young people there said, I've learned a lot in this class. It's very interesting, but I will never take another class from you again. And then he paused and he said, you have a way of making people feel real small. Period. Now, I knew exactly what he was talking. It was that the sarcasm and the ridicule and the anger, but let's laugh, ha, ha, ha. And with 6 and 7, being aware of something doesn't mean it goes away. And I had to practice restraint of tongue and pen, especially in Narcotics Anonymous, they'll say first thought wrong. First funny thing might not be that funny. Might be mean-spirited. Sarcasm is the kind of humor that tears the flesh. And I don't want to do that. I hope I'm more ironic and goofy than sarcastic. But I've been working on that for about 25 years. Mary Oliver has a poem about her father who was a drunk. And he would come to her in her dreams at night, and like parents do sometimes. And he was there, and the meanness was gone. But she mostly, as a living drunk, he was mean. And I don't want to be mean. The love is patient, love is kind thing, I try to take that seriously. sarcasm, and resentments. And I still get resentful. With any of, so anyway, sponsor, I've asked to have these removed. Why do I still have them? And he said, we asked to have them removed, not erased. And they can be removed. They go to the attic or the back room or the basement, and they stay there until you're thrown off balance, until you're caught by surprise, until you're frightened. And then they come in groups of 2 and 3 and join hands and make a huge mess in front of everybody. It's worse when I am too hungry, too angry, too lonely, too tired. More vulnerable for those things. And when my selfishness, my conceit, my jealousy, my carelessness, my intolerance, my ill temper, my sarcasm, and my resentments boil up, I need to promptly admit it and clean up the mess. I think my first 10 years I was wrong 5 or 6 times. And now I am wrong on a very regular basis frequently. And being able just to say, I was wrong. I was wrong. I had an encounter with the boss a few years ago. And we got called into the imperial presence. And I thought we were going to be talking about apples, oranges, and bananas. And instead the topic was, why should my community even exist? I was caught by surprise. I did not know that we were on the chopping block. And I lied. I made some things up right away, defending us, making us better than we were, and more of this and more of that. But it was all out of fear, and it was a lie, and it was to protect the group. And on the way back home, I had a bad taste in my mouth, which now happens when I lie. I get a bad taste in my mouth. I think that's an indication I have a conscience, and I'm grateful for that. If your conscience never bothers you, perhaps you don't have a conscience that bothers you. And you might want to talk to your higher power about that. But I knew I got home and I have to clean this up. So I slept on it. And I wrote His Majesty an email the next day. And I said, when you asked me about ABC, let me give you a better answer. And I gave him an honest answer. But if you catch me by surprise, my first instinct is to protect, to lie, to change, manage, manipulate. We went over these at great length, and then he finally asked me if I wanted these defects of character removed. Again, the word is removed. When I said yes, we both knelt at his desk, each of us asking to have these defects taken away. This picture is still vivid. If I live to be 100, it will always stand out in my mind. I mean, kneeling and praying with Dr. Bob is like a Moses on the mountain experience, don't you think? Turn the page. A few months after I made my original trip to Akron, I was feeling pretty cocky, and I didn't think my wife was treating me with proper respect. Now that I was an outstanding citizen. So I set out to get drunk deliberately just to teach her what she was missing. I mean, the alcoholics, I don't have to explain, perhaps to this is how we think, by the way. It really is, and it's very sad. And then he had to sober up again, and he had to realize it taught me a valuable lesson. In the summer of 1938, almost a year from the time I made my original contact with Akron, the man for whom I was working and who knew about the program approached me and asked if I could do anything about one of his salesmen who was drinking very heavily. I went to the sanitarium, and he made his first 12-step call. God's will is a big topic. I asked my sponsor, what is God's will? And he said, it is God's will for each of us to have a life. Go get one. Which means making decisions and making mistakes and trying things out and changing this and you got to get out of your head and out of your room and into being alive again. The working and the loving and the playing. It all involves other people in 100 different ways. Friends, companions, allies. I heard Terry talk about this spiritual awakening stuff. The spiritual experience stuff. He was sober less than a year. He's reflecting on this years later. He was at a meeting, and a young man was getting an acknowledgement for 6 months of sobriety. And the kid was just so happy. And the kid said, I get to be sober. You get to be sober. And Terry said what he felt towards that young person was joy. And he said a real spiritual experience, the authentic deal, is when you feel joy when you experience someone else getting well. I think that's very profound. My first meeting in Oakland, the room was full of very elderly persons, all in their 50s and 60s, elderly persons. And I told them that I hadn't had a drink since Tuesday night. And when I said at Friday night meeting I hadn't had a drink since Tuesday night, they burst into applause. It was genuine. It was spontaneous. It wasn't pro forma. They were really happy that I had gone for a couple of days without a drink. It's a great big deal. And it still is. I mean, anyone can get 40 years. Fools get 30. Crazy people get 20. Sociopaths get 10. But how do you cobble together those first weekend and then the second weekend of not drinking and not using, and you're not even fighting it? It's sudden. We've received something. We've received a gift, and we're cooperating and saying yes. How do I know I'm alcoholic? The unhappy drinker. I went to a meeting at one of the clubhouses in the area. Not a lot of people were there, but there was an old guy I'd seen around. And I asked him if he thought I was alcoholic. And he said, "Oh, Tom, I don't know if you're an alcoholic. I know I'm an alcoholic." And I said, How do you know? He said, "I know I'm an alcoholic because I cannot guarantee my behavior after my first drink." Now, I've heard that before. But it's just him and me and no one else is there, so I can ask a further question. And what I asked him was, what does that mean? And he said, that means sometimes I could drink a lot and nothing would happen. Other times I'd drink just a little and anything could happen. And I never knew which one it was going to be. And that's my story. I was in Southern California last year and I was giving a talk to the young fellows in our order. the guys in the first year or so, and a couple of us sober people come in and talk about recovery and Al-Anon and AA, and a number of them are from alcoholic families, and a number of them, with any luck at all, will be alcoholics. And there was a visiting priest there who saw what we were doing, and we showed a great alcoholic movie, so people can get all excited. And this priest came up to me and he said, can I talk to you about this? He said, I'm not sure if I'm an alcoholic or not. I've been talking about it with my shrink for about a year. Okay. And I'm just not sure. And I said, have you stayed dry? Oh, yeah, but I'm not sure, And I said, why don't you just give yourself the benefit of the doubt? And with any luck at all, you're a hopeless falling down drunk. And you'll have a much better time for the rest of your life if you'll join us. You don't have to do this alone with a shrink. We come to believe. Albert Einstein has that wonderful equation, E equals mc squared, which means we're all connected and it's moving. That's what it means to me. We're all connected and it's moving, and I want to be in that process of being on the road of happy destiny. I have an amusing story to tell you, and then I'm done. This was a story that was in the 3rd edition of the Big Book. It was a guy. Where are you? Oh, I should have chosen it beforehand. Where are you? It was a guy who he had to be shown. Page 222. I was married at the age of 19 to a grand girl, and we had good business prospects. I had bought a piece of ground in Cayuga Falls and cut it into lots and had a profit of approximately $40,000, and that was a lot of money in those days. With that profit, I built a number of houses, but I neglected them. I wouldn't put sufficient time on them. Consequently, my labor bills ran up, I lost money, and then just fooled away a large part of the profit. When I was 18, at the end of high school, the high school team had a banquet at a well-known roadhouse outside of Akron. We boys drove out in somebody's car and went to the bar on the way to the dining room, and I, in an effort to impress the other boys that I was city-bred, having lived in Scranton and Cleveland, asked them if they didn't want a drink. They looked at one another, and finally one of them allowed he'd have a beer. And they all followed him, each of them saying he'd have a beer too. Kids. If your friends jumped off the bridge, would you jump too? Absolutely. I mean, they're my friends. Each of them saying he'd have a beer too. I ordered a martini extra dry. I didn't even know what a martini looked like, but I had heard a man down the bar order one. That was my first drink. Usually for kids, they have sparkly, sugary, winey things, or chocolate with vodka. I mean, something you can drink when you're 9. I kept watching the man down the bar to see what he did with a contraption like that, and he just smelled of his drink and set it down again. So I did the same. He took a couple of puffs of a cigarette, and I took a couple of puffs of my cigarette. He tossed off half of his martini. I tossed off half of mine, and it nearly blew the top of my head off. It irritated my nostrils. I choked. I didn't like it. There was nothing about that drink that I liked. But I watched him, and he tossed off the rest of his, so I tossed off the rest of mine. He ate his olive, and I ate mine. I didn't even like the olive. I drank 9 martinis in less than an hour. I know this guy. My current sponsor is a woman named Peggy. Peggy's 96 years old, sober 52 years. Her mother lived to be 105, so I'm expecting her to be around for a while. We've known each other for 40 years, but you need to have someone to check in with. You know? She's full of common sense. And she's from Hinsdale, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago. And the people in Hinsdale mostly pride themselves on not going to Chicago. We don't go to Chicago. And she left home and she went to Stanford University. This is the late 1940s. Stanford, and her father told her she could be a teacher or a nurse because that's what girls do. And there she was learning with these fancy Stanford University people. It's kind of a little snobby and snooty for a school. And she met a guy named Joe. And Joe liked her a lot. She didn't like him all that much, but they got married. That happens a lot. He was so insistent and cute. And he introduced her to a more sophisticated world, a fancier world. He introduced her to the gin martini. And Peggy fell in love with the gin martini. And they had a couple of kids, and then there was a pause, and they had a couple of more kids. And when Peggy tells her story, she says, I loved the olive, I loved the vermouth, I loved the glass, I loved the cold glass, I loved the ice-cold gin. I loved putting it together. It was a ritual I just looked forward to and enjoyed so much. And then I found out I didn't need the olive. And then I found out I didn't need the vermouth. And then I found out I didn't need the glass. She gets sober with great difficulty. What happens is it's her son Michael's 10th birthday, and they buy a cake and they're going to have a little party for the family. Michael's the youngest boy. And she and Joe get in this fight like we get into fights, and there was screaming and yelling and shouting. And screaming and yelling and shouting, and people pass out. Peggy wakes up the next morning very hungover, and she comes to the kitchen, and the cake is still there uncut. Where's Michael? They can't find him. They look everywhere, and they finally find him hiding in his closet. And he says to her, "You and Daddy are crazy." And for her, that was bottom. She gets well. She starts making amends. She's with all those kids in new sobriety, and Joe comes out of the back bedroom with a bunch of handkerchiefs, and she's doing laundry. 5 kids. And Joe says, "Peggy, can you iron these handkerchiefs?" And she said, "Iron your own effing handkerchiefs." Now, no one in that town ever used that word before, and it was never heard in her family before, and everyone stopped breathing. Where does she learn that awful language? And he turned completely white and just backed up and went back to the bedroom. She was getting in touch with some anger that had been there for a while, and she began making amends. And she talked to her older kids, and she said, "I really owe you an amends. I was a bad mom." They said, "Oh, Mom, you were fun. For us, you were really fun. But you want to talk to the younger kids." Michael's now 35 years sober. We tell our stories, we share our experience, our strength, and our hope. And what my sponsor would nag me about over and over again was identify, don't compare, identify, don't compare, identify, don't compare. Because so many of us come in so isolated and so lonely and so shut down. And you go to meetings and you go to meetings and you go to meetings and suddenly you hear something that's familiar. In the preface to the book, it says, we're going to give you 42 completely different stories. We know you're unique. We know you're special. We know you're different. We hope you can identify with one of them and think, oh my goodness, that happened to me. Or, oh, I felt like that. Or, maybe this can work for me too. Joyous and happy and free. We get to be here. It's a great gift. At my Tuesday night meeting, there's nothing fancy about the meeting at all. We serve coffee sometimes, depending on he shows up with the coffee, and otherwise we're just fine. But we have a habit of having someone share for about 15 minutes their experience, strength, and hope. And we introduce that person as the worst alcoholic of the week, because it's kind of an award, to share. And this week, the worst alcoholic of the week is Sally. And Sally, if she's not used to that, she's quite shocked. How did I get this distinction? She says, oh, we know. You clearly are the worst alcoholic of the week. Congratulations. We're so glad you're here. We're so glad you're here. Don't try harder. Resist less. And walk in what they call the sunlight of the Spirit, which changes everything. That's all I know.
Yeah.
I have an instruction I can't follow. Is there something else I'm supposed to do besides close?
Star Spangled Banner?
I can do it.
Yeah, I would hope so.
It says I have a presentation to make. Okay. Well, then I'm going to close this meeting. And thank you very much.
Don't forget we have Olight and bumper stickers up here. For those who need a little cheering up.
I guess if you thought of somebody that needed it, you might have had a little slip. Our program continues tomorrow morning at 8:45. And we are going to close with the Lord's Prayer, staying in our spot. And thank you again, Tom. It's always a delight. I always come away with a lot more things than I could probably implement, but bumper sticker's a good one. All together, please. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. See you at 8:45.
Hooray!